The funeral director adjusted my father's tie one last time before closing the casket. I stood there in my simple black dress, watching them prepare to take him to his final rest. My phone buzzed in my purse. I'd forgotten to silence it. "I've changed your locks. This building is for respectable people only." The text was from Diane Morrison, my neighbor from Unit 4B. Attached was a photo of my apartment door with a shiny new deadbolt installed. My hand shook as I read her follow-up message. "Your loud music, strange visitors, and irregular hours are done.
Pack your things from the hallway when you get back."
Diane Morrison, building committee chair. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Loud music? I was a classical pianist who practiced with headphones after 6 p.m. Strange visitors? Those were my father's hospice nurses coming to check on me after his death. Irregular hours? I'd been at the hospital and funeral home for 2 weeks straight. "Sophia, we're ready," the funeral director said gently. I slipped my phone back into my purse. My father deserved my full attention today. Diane Morrison could wait. The service was beautiful. My father, Anthony Reeves, had touched many lives as a high school history teacher. Former students, now adults with children of their own, came to pay their respects. They shared stories of how he'd inspire them, helped them through tough times, or simply made them laugh with his terrible history puns. "Your father was so proud of you," his best friend Carl whispered to me. "He talked about you constantly. His daughter, the financial genius who was going to change the world." I squeezed Carl's hand. Dad had been my biggest cheerleader. When I left my corporate job to start my own investment firm, he'd even been my first client, trusting me with his modest retirement savings. That initial investment had grown enough to pay for his care during his final illness and still leave a substantial sum. What Carl didn't know, what nobody except my lawyer knew, was that my father had been far wealthier than anyone imagined. His frugal lifestyle and modest teacher salary had hidden a brilliant investor who'd quietly amassed a fortune through decades of smart decisions. He'd left everything to me, including his crown jewel, the entire Rosegate Commons building, where I lived. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was building security. "Miss Reeves, there's a situation at your apartment. Mrs. Morrison is insisting we evict you immediately. She says you're trespassing." "I'm at my father's funeral," said quietly, stepping away from the crowd. "I'll be there in 2 hours." "She's quite insistent, ma'am. She's called the police." "Let her. I'll handle it when I arrive." I returned to the graveside service, watching them lower my father into the ground next to my mother. He'd bought these plots 30 years ago, always planning ahead. Just like he'd planned ahead when he'd purchased Rosegate Commons through a shell company, maintaining his anonymity while ensuring he always had control over his home. The drive back to the building took 40 minutes. I could see the flashing lights from 2 blocks away. 3 police cars and building security were clustered outside the main entrance. Diane Morrison stood in the center, gesticulating wildly in her designer suit. I parked in my assigned spot, the one Diane had tried to have reassigned to herself 6 months ago, and walked calmly toward the commotion. "There she is," Diane shrieked. "Arrest her. She's trespassing." Officer Bryant, whom I recognized from previous building disputes, looked tired. "Ma'am, we've been through this. She's a legal resident. You can't just change someone's locks." "I'm the building committee chair. I have the authority to remove disruptive tenants." "No, you don't," I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. Diane's face flushed. "You have some nerve showing up here dressed like that." She gestured at my funeral attire with disgust. "Trying to manipulate everyone with your sob story. Well, it won't work. I know what you really are, a woman who entertains men at all hours, plays that awful music, and brings down our property values." The men were hospice nurses. The music is Chopin, played through headphones. And as for property values, I pulled out my phone and opened the email from my lawyer. Building Security Chief James approached me with obvious relief. "Miss Reeves, I'm so sorry about this. I tried to explain to Mrs. Morrison that she has no authority to change locks." "It's all right, James. I know you were just doing your job." I turned to Officer Bryant. "I'd like to file charges for breaking and entering, theft, and harassment." Diane laughed shrilly. You can't file charges against me. I'm the building committee chair. I've lived here for 15 years. You're just some nobody who moved in 2 years ago. Actually, I said, pulling up the deed transfer on my phone. As of yesterday, I'm the owner of Rosegate Commons. The entire building. The silence was deafening. That's impossible, Diane stammered. James, the security chief, was the first to understand. His eyes widened as he remembered all the times he'd seen my father visiting, all the conversations we'd had about building maintenance and resident concerns. Mr. Reeves was your father, he said softly. Anthony Reeves. He owned the building through AVR Enterprises. I nodded. He passed away 2 weeks ago. The building transferred to me upon his death. No, Diane whispered. No. The owner is some foreign investor. Everyone knows that. Everyone was wrong, I said. My father bought this building 35 years ago. He lived in Unit 6A for 10 years before moving to the suburbs to be closer to the school where he taught. He kept his ownership private to avoid conflicts of interest with residents. Officer Bryant was checking something on his tablet. It's all here. Public records show the deed transfer from AVR Enterprises to Sophia Marie Reeves, filed yesterday. He looked at Diane with poorly concealed satisfaction. Ma'am, you broke into your landlord's apartment. Diane's face went from red to white to green in the span of seconds. I didn't know. You didn't care to know, I corrected. For 2 years, you've harassed me. You filed false complaints about noise when I practiced piano with headphones. You called security when my father's nurses came to check on me. You've tried to have my parking space reassigned, my storage unit relocated, and my mail held. And today, while I was burying my father, you broke into my home. The building committee voted. Diane protested weakly. Show me the minutes, I said. Show me the vote where the building committee decided to break into my apartment. Her silence was answer enough. There was no vote, James confirmed. Mrs. Morrison acted alone. She came to me this morning with locksmith receipts and demanded I update our key records. I refused and told her it was illegal. That's when she said she'd handle it herself. I turned to the gathering crowd of residents who'd come out to watch the drama. Many of them had been victims of Diane's arbitrary rules and power trips over the years. As the new owner of Rosegate Commons, my first official act is to dissolve the current building committee. We'll hold new elections next month, with proper bylaws and limitations on authority. A cheer went up from several residents. Mrs. Chun from 3C actually applauded. Diane looked around wildly for support, but found none. Even her usual allies, the Peterduns from 4A, were avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Morrison, Officer Bryant said, I need you to return Miss Reeves' keys immediately. I threw them away, Diane admitted. I didn't think she'd need them anymore. Then you'll need to pay for an emergency locksmith to restore her access tonight, the officer said. And you'll need to come with us to the station. You're arresting me? Diane shrieked. But I'm respectable. I'm on the hospital board. My husband is a partner at Morrison, Clean and Associates. And you're also someone who broke into another person's home, Officer Bryant said, pulling out handcuffs. Turn around, please. As they led Diane away, she kept protesting about respectability and property values and the natural order of things. The other residents dispersed slowly, many stopping to offer condolences about my father and apologies for not standing up to Diane sooner. James stayed behind. Your father would be proud of how you handled that, he said. He always said you had a gift for staying calm under pressure. You knew him well. We played chess every Sunday morning in the lobby for 20 years. He never mentioned owning the building, but he always asked detailed questions about maintenance issues and resident concerns. Now I understand why. James paused. He talked about you constantly. Said you were brilliant, but too humble for your own good. Guess he was right. I had no idea you were the Sophia Ree from Ree Capital Management. I smiled sadly. He insisted I make my own way, not trade on his connections. I didn't even know he owned this building until last week, when the lawyer read his will. What are your plans for it? Honor his vision, I said. He believed in community, in people taking care of each other. Diane turned the building committee into her personal kingdom. We're going to fix that. The locksmith arrived within an hour, and I finally entered my apartment. Everything was as I'd left it that morning, except for a pile of my belongings that Diane had already removed, stacked haphazardly by the door. My father's photograph, the one I kept on the entry table, had been knocked over and the frame cracked. I picked it up carefully, looking at his smiling face. Well, Dad, I think I handled that with the grace and dignity you always preached. Though I'm not sure having someone arrested counts as graceful.
My phone rang.
It was my lawyer. Sophia, I heard about the incident. Building security called me. Are you pressing charges?
Yes.
She needs to face consequences.
Good.
I've already fielded 3 calls from her husband's law firm, trying to make this go away. They're offering to pay for damages and issue a formal apology.
Not good enough, I said.
She terrorized residents for years, using her position to bully anyone she deemed unrespectable. It ends now. The next morning, Diane's arrest made the local news. Building committee chair arrested for breaking and entering wasn't the headline she'd probably imagined when she woke up yesterday. Her husband's law firm issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. But the real vindication came from the other residents. Mrs. Chen from 3C knocked on my door with homemade soup and a story about how Diane had tried to fine her for hanging a traditional Chinese blessing on her door. She said it wasn't in keeping with the building's aesthetic, Mrs. Chen explained, but it was a gift from my grandmother. Tom and Mark from 2F shared how Diane had tried to prevent them from adopting a child, claiming 2 men raising a baby would disturb the
peace.
They'd fought her for months before giving up and looking for another place to live. Please don't make us move, Tom said. This is our home. Nobody's moving, I assured them. In fact, if you're still interested in adopting, my father's will include provisions for family-friendly renovations to the building. We're adding a playground and child-proofing the common areas. The stories kept coming. Diane had denied a wheelchair ramp request as unsightly. She'd rejected a therapy dog as disruptive. She'd even tried to evict a young teacher for having students visit for tutoring, claiming it was running a business from home. Each story strengthened my resolve. My father had bought this building to create a community, not a kingdom for petty tyrants. The criminal case moved quickly. Diane's lawyer tried to argue it was a civil matter between landlord and tenant. But the prosecutor, who happened to live in a building with a similar HOA horror story, disagreed. Mrs. Morrison used her perceived authority to commit breaking and entering, the prosecutor argued. She destroyed property, attempted theft, and showed premeditation by arranging the locksmith in advance. The fact that she chose to do this while Miss Reeves attended her father's funeral shows particular cruelty. Diane pleaded no contest to misdemeanor breaking and entering. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution. The judge also issued a restraining order preventing her from holding any position of authority in any residential building for 5 years. But the real consequences came from the civil suit. My lawyer was thorough, documenting years of Diane's discriminatory actions as building committee chair. The hospital board quietly requested her resignation. Her husband's law firm suggested she take an extended sabbatical from their charitable foundation work. The building newsletter, which Diane had controlled with an iron fist, published its first free edition in years. The headline, New Beginnings at Rosegate Commons. It featured interviews with residents about their hopes for the building's future and a tribute to my father, the secret owner who'd protected them from the shadows. I found evidence of his protection everywhere. Rent increases that Diane had pushed for had been mysteriously rejected by ownership. Renovation requests she denied had been quietly approved and funded. Every time she'd tried to evict someone for arbitrary reasons, the management company had found ways to delay or deny her requests. Your father was a guardian angel, James told me. Now I understand why he always seemed to know when someone was struggling. 6 months later, Rosegate Commons was transformed. The new building committee, elected fairly, included Mrs. Chun, Tom, and Mark, and a rotating seat, Chun, Tom, and Mark, and a rotating seat for newer residents. We'd installed the playground, added the wheelchair ramp, and created a community garden on the roof. Diane's unit went on the market after her divorce was finalized. Her husband, mortified by the scandal and furious about the impact on his firm's reputation, had left her for a younger associate, who actually was everything Diane had accused me of being. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I approved the sale to a young couple. She was a social worker, he was a freelance artist, exactly the kind of unrespectable people Diane would have hated. They loved the building's new community spirit and immediately joined the gardening club. On the first anniversary of my father's death, we held a memorial in the lobby. Residents shared stories of his kindness, how he'd secretly paid for groceries when someone was struggling, how he'd arranged job interviews for unemployed residents through his teaching connections, how he'd made everyone feel welcome regardless of their background. He never wanted credit, Mrs. Chin said, just wanted to help. I stood before his portrait, which now hung in the lobby with a plaque. Anthony Reeves. Teacher, neighbor, friend. A man who believed in community. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, then recognized the area code. It was from the state where Diane had relocated. I heard about the memorial. I'm sorry for everything. Your father was a good man, and you're a worthy successor. I was wrong about what makes someone respectable.
DM.
I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. But I hoped she'd learn something from the experience. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the same one Diane had tried to take from me, playing Chopin on my piano. No headphones this time. The music drifted through the building, and nobody complained. In fact, Mrs. Chen opened her door to listen better, and Tom and Mark brought their newly adopted daughter to sit in the hallway and hear the notes. This was what my father had envisioned. Not a building of respectable people, but a community of good people. People who supported each other, who celebrated differences, who understood that true respectability came from how you treated others, not from your job title or bank account. As the last notes faded, I heard applause from the hallway. My neighbors had gathered, drawn by the music Diane had called awful. They smiled and waved before returning to their homes, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my father's photograph. I think I'm doing okay, Dad, I whispered. The building is what you always wanted it to be, a real home for everyone. And somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard his voice on the wind. That's my girl. Always knew you'd change the world. I closed the piano and prepared for bed, secure in my home, surrounded by my community, carrying forward my father's legacy of quiet kindness and fierce protection of those who needed it most. The locks on my door were new, but they opened to the same truth they always had. Home isn't about who has the fanciest apartment or the most prestigious title. It's about belonging, acceptance, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even if you have to do it in your funeral dress while your father's grave is still fresh. Sometimes, that's when it matters most.